I'm going to give him one more minute and then we'll get started.
We got 5 pages of people already.
Safety is a popular topic, as it should be.
That's a great thing. Yeah.
All right, I'm gonna one more. Okay. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the second in a 5-part series, second safety talk in a 5-part series. I'm Deborah Kane. I'm with the Lower Columbia Canoe Club. We're the host of tonight's discussion. And thanks to Teresa Grider. Hello, Teresa. We have been hosting safety talks every other Tuesday. We started 2 weeks ago Tuesday, and we're going to run all the way through April 13th. So if you're joining us for the first time, you're perfectly on time. This is the second, and hopefully you can join us every other Tuesday and catch up on the rest of the series. Yeah, participate with us as we go through the series. A big apology to anyone who missed the safety talk from 2 weeks ago. We had absolutely every intention of recording it, and we had a technical difficulty, and we did not get it recorded. But we did, Teresa, thanks to Teresa, do a wonderful summary of the content that was covered. And that was in the Lower Columbia Canoe Club's most recent newsletter. So if you're not a member, you could just reach out to me, reach out to Teresa, and we'll make sure that you get the summary of that discussion from 2 weeks ago. What else can I tell you? The next discussion, 2 weeks, in 2 weeks will be accident reporting with Charlie Wellbridge, who's on the line. And that's going to be on Tuesday, March 16th, same time, 6:30 p.m. Pacific time. And then the very next day, the club is hosting a discussion with Noria Newman on the concept of fear. So the safety talks are free and open to the public, open to anybody. And the Noria Newman talk is a members only event. So if you've been wondering whether you should join the Lower Columbia Canoe Club, and if you've been enjoying the free content, you might want to go ahead and join the club. It's only $25 for the year so that you can participate with us during the Noria Newman talk, which is going to be again on Wednesday, March 17th. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Teresa. Teresa is going to introduce the speakers for tonight's discussion on decision making. And I'm told that the content is relatively dense. So the speakers and Teresa are going to do their best to run through all the content that they've prepared for tonight. And we're going to ask that if you have questions to please just type them into the chat. And we'll field questions probably at the very end. So just know that we see your question, but we want to move through the content and then we'll answer questions at the end. So with that, Teresa, I'm going to hand it over to you, and I'm also going to let you share your screen and admit a bunch more people.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for coming. I'm so excited that there's this much interest in whitewater safety and river safety, because it is a subject that is very important to me. Let me know when you can see my people on the screen.
You're good.
Gotcha.
All right. So our presentation tonight is about the human factor, and that is the crazy things that people do, and sometimes the brilliant things. And the 2 people that I have with me tonight, the first is Paul Reimars, and he's an engineer who got into paddling, what year was it, 2016?
Yes, ma'am.
Kind of recently. However, he has a background in mountaineering, backcountry skiing, rock climbing, motorcycle racing.
Yes, ma'am.
A few dangerous pursuits in his list, and he's still here. So he probably has learned a thing or two along the way. He lives in White Salmon, right next to the White Salmon River. So he gets a lot of river time these days and has a lot of ideas that are developing rapidly. And our other guest is Rainey Hoffman, who hails from New Orleans originally. And like me, he started paddling a long time ago in an aluminum canoe. But somehow he survived all of that. And you've done a lot of things, Rainey. He's a lawyer now, living in Seattle. And in between, he worked for American Whitewater for a while doing river conservation. He did some studying about how riffles are formed in rivers, how rapids form, which I got to help with the surveying for that. And I've known him since we were guides together on the Chattooga. So that's been a longer term relationship. And he's the one that pointed out to me that in the skiing, skiers have been studying on heuristic traps for some 30, 40 years now, and paddlers haven't been doing it. So it's an area where we can learn a lot from the skiers. Let me see, before I start flipping through slides, if you want to ask questions, type them into the chat window. And if you have topics that you really want us to cover in the future, feel free to type that in there too, and we'll try and get a list going. And I wanted to wonder if anybody, and you don't have to talk, but if you listen to the River Talk podcast about heuristic traps, I'd be curious to know if you did that. It was number 96. It was from December 2020, and it kind of got us started on this path as well. All right, let me see what I can do here. All right, here's my men. Rainey Hoffman, Paul Reimers, and that's me. And I've been paddling since I was a little girl. I've worked in the river business my whole life. Now I'm not really working in the river business anymore, and I get to paddle more, which is great. And I live in Portland, Oregon now, which is, as far as I'm concerned, heaven for the whitewater paddler. All right, so what are heuristics? This is what we're going to talk about tonight. Facets, which is the skiing take on it. A few more heuristics that paddlers might want to know about. And there's more than that, but we can only do so much. Risk factors for falling into a trap, how to avoid and escape traps. And then at the very end, we're going to talk about, we called it getting used to bad habits, but basically, how do you know when you're getting slack with your safety and it's time to update your safety standards? So what is a heuristic trap? I got the Wikipedia definition here, but basically it's an unconscious understanding that guides quick action. So heuristics are unconscious and they let us figure out what to do without wasting any time. And it gets more complicated than that. Oops, what did I do? I lost my show. There it is. Sorry, I don't know why it's not going to the next one. There it is. You want to talk about Daniel Kahneman, Rainey?
Sure. Yeah. So thanks for the great intro, Teresa. And it's awesome to be here. I moved to the Pacific Northwest 5 years ago, and I'm getting back into boating now that my daughters are getting to college age years. So I'm very excited about that. One of the goals of the slide, we were using these sort of highfalutin terms like heuristic, and we'll get to another concept later called normalization of deviance. But essentially what we're trying to accomplish is to talk about decision making with risk. And all of us have deep experience with both risk and decision making. We make decisions about risk every day. It's part of the human condition. And we tend to make these decisions very intuitively. That's essential to our survival. We have to make, thousands and thousands of decisions every day. If we were having to think deeply about those decisions, we'd go insane. And so our brains have come up with kind of two different systems of thinking. And this was explored most recently by economist Daniel Kahneman in his book that came out 5 or 10 years ago called Thinking Fast and Slow. And he comes out, his thesis is that there are the two systems. System one is this fast, automatic thinking that uses heuristics. It uses these mental shortcuts that allow us to make very quick decisions. On the other hand, there's the system two thinking, which is slow and effortful and requires thought. And so this talk is really about some of these mental shortcuts that can get us in trouble. And so one thing, in order to kind of crystallize this concept that might be helpful, let me use an example from the book that could sort of help you to understand system one versus system two. So here it is. There's a baseball bat and a ball together that cost $1.10. The bat costs $1 more than the baseball. How much does the ball cost? All right, so immediately, you're thinking system one, that's costs $1, right? But that's obviously system one thinking. If the bat costs $1 more than the ball, then that would make the bat cost $1.10, and then your total would be $1.20, not the $1.10 that they cost together. So if you immediately jump into system one thinking without giving it a lot of thought, you'd come up with the wrong answer. The right answer, is of course the ball costs 5 cents, so that the bat would be $1 more, it'd be $1.05, and together they'd be $1.10. I think if I said, now if you give me the wrong answer to that question, it's going to cost you $5,000. You would immediately jump into system two. So that's kind of what this talk is about, is trying to figure out when we're in system one thinking, when that's useful, and when we actually may want to be into system two thinking.
Anything to add, Paul?
Yeah, so Rainey and you and Teresa turned me on to this terminology just recently. And as an engineer, I like seeing numbers on the page. So system one, great. The first thing that comes to mind. System two, that's the longer term thinking that comes to mind later. I've used this in different forms over the years. I'm also kind of, one way I came to think of it is system one is kind of my in the moment thinking, fast, automatic, and system two is kind of my over coffee kind of a thinking where I go back and reflect. And I find, especially when I think about my kayaking experience, I've got quite a bit less experience than you guys. I'm still a lot more in the conscious learning phase. So I find myself bouncing back and forth really deliberately between the fast learning in the moment, and then I go back home and I process and I learn, and I'm doing a lot of bouncing back and forth between the non-conscious and the conscious thinking to try to learn these kayaking lessons and whatnot. So this was a really the concept of the different types of thinking was pretty powerful to me. In fact, preparing for this talk, now when somebody says, "Hey, Paul, think about this, think about that," I think when and how, because there's such different types of thinking, and by leveraging the different styles, I feel like I can deliberately become better at both of them with practice and with time, though.
We might move on. I think we're getting to heuristic traps next.
Yep. There's
Here we
system
go.
one. We did that. Okay. When does it become a trap?
Good
Go
question.
ahead.
So here's my thoughts, and Paul and Teresa, please jump in. So, we talked about mental shortcuts being useful in a lot of situations, but it can lead to a bad risk decision because it will cause us to ignore facts or new data that's coming in. Our system one thinking will override our paying attention to the environment, the rising water level, the group dynamics. And will cause us to sort of continue in a decision-making process that will increase our risk.
I like to, if I can have a clear head and think, what is my decision criteria, and do my decisions stand up against my system of values? If I can stand behind, justify, explain my decisions in a way that reflects what's important to me, that's probably a good thing. If I can't, if I finish a run and I say, wow, I was making decisions and, that's you know, I'm a guy who likes to understand the lines, understand consequences and whatnot. If I finish a kayaking run and I say, wow, I made a lot of decisions today, many of them did not reflect who I want to be as a paddler, that's a good sign to me that I may have gotten stuck in some traps that day.
Mhm. Something that I became aware of actually just in the last few days, I was reading more about this, and let me read to you one sentence. When system one thought acts on misleading salient regularities, misinformation or disinformation, it can reach erroneous conclusions. And basically things like conspiracy theories and race bias are also system one. And so this applies to our political situation as well. Belief in misinformation and disinformation is a failure to engage system two thinking, critical thinking. That's what it is.
Yeah, Teresa, that's a great point. I mean, there's sort of a related concept of cognitive bias, which is, you know, I think it's defined as a systematic deviation from rationality or judgment. So essentially, individuals are creating their own subjective reality and not paying attention to facts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and they are living in system one, which is hard to imagine, but I understand because system two takes so much more effort. It takes a lot of work to think critically about anything. It's not automatic in the least. So this slide is supposed to just simply bring up the fact that the majority of our processing power is unconscious, just like Rainey was saying. And one of my favorite examples of that unconscious ability is when I'm driving and I'm trying to go somewhere other than work. And instead, I just automatically drive to work. I have to really work hard to not drive on that same route that I always drive. And that's autopilot, that's system one. Or shooting baskets, you can't get a basket in there by thinking it in. You have to just do the motion enough times that you know the motion. And rolling's the same way. The more you practice it, the more it becomes system one. But at first you have to think about every little thing. Keep your head down, keep your elbow down. Anything to add on that?
That's good. It covers it.
Right on. Oh yes, this is one of my favorite concepts. And it's not really about traps for everyone. It's about your unconscious or conscious learning process. When you first start to learn something, you're on the bottom left side of this graph. And then as you learn it, you move up and to the right. So at the beginning, you're unconscious, incompetent. You don't know what you're doing, and you don't know that you don't know what you're doing. And then as you become aware that there's something for you to learn, you go into conscious incompetence. And then once you start learning some skills, you still have to think about it to do those skills, like rolling, for example. Then you have conscious competence. You can roll, but you have to think about keeping your head down. And then there comes this stage at the far right-hand side where you don't have to think about it anymore. You just know how to do it, right? And the traps mostly lie on the two extremes, at the beginning where you're unconscious and at the end where you're unconscious.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, Teresa. I think that that unconscious brain is when the heuristics kick in, because you're in system one and you don't realize when you should really be in system two.
Mm-hmm.
I think in many cases with my kayaking, for a variety of reasons, I'm in like the third step. I'm able to do things now, but I think through them. I was on the middle white salmon a couple weeks ago, and it's a run I've done at this point, I don't know, 100 times, probably a lot more. Somebody asked me, "Hey, Paul, what's the line for this next rapid?" And I just paused for a second because I was like, my body knows it, but I don't know if I can, it's not at the tip of my tongue. It's like the part of my brain that knew how to do these lines one after the other was kind of not connected to my consciousness or even my verbal center for a few seconds. I thought, holy smokes. I used, 2 years ago, I could spot off every wave of this run, but it was kind of a reflective moment because I wasn't sure what to think about it, because it's okay if my body's getting used to these different motions and different rapids, et cetera, but I don't want to get into a trap where I gloss over hazards, for example, or I forget to be deliberate and think about the things that I really want to think about. So I I spent a little time thinking about, as I get better at the progression, when do I bounce back and forth between the fourth step and the third step, just to apply that conscious thought to make sure I'm not falling into a familiarity trap or an optimism trap or something like that.
Mm-hmm. Cool. All right. Oh, this slide is just to point out the history of this research, this 1994 study, and look at the things in the box there: attitude, money, ego. These are the things that cause people to die in avalanche accidents.
Yeah, Teresa, so part of the inspiration for this talk was I took your basic Avalanche 1 ARI training class a couple of years ago. And I was impressed. Well, one thing that struck me was that it's not really much about snow science. It's really about how to make decisions, and how to make decisions with respect to risk and uncertainty, and the social and psychological factors that go into those decisions.
Mm-hmm.
One statistic that they talk about in the avalanche class is 90% of avalanche accidents, in those accidents, the trigger was either the victim or someone in the victim's party. So that leads you to believe that, these were all essentially the result of human errors and judgment, and were therefore avoidable. I think the whitewater, my experience has been the whitewater community is very good at teaching skills, and there's some teaching and learning about these psychological aspects of decision making that will improve our training and our safety protocol quite a bit. All right, so this next part of the talk is borrowing shamelessly from the ARI 1 class. So those of you who are backcountry skiers and have taken the avalanche class, this will look very familiar. There was this kind of this seminal article by a engineer like you, Paul, named Ian Hammond, who wrote an article called "Heuristic Traps in Recreational Avalanche Accidents." And he uses this acronym FACETS to identify probably the 6 most common heuristic traps that skiers would fall into, but we sort of adapted them to whitewater boating. The first one, F, familiarity. Okay, so what's the definition of this? Essentially, boaters traveling on a familiar river make riskier decisions versus traveling on a new river. I think this is especially pronounced for parties with substantial experience. So the heuristic is, we expect familiar environments to be safer. We expect them to behave in the same way as they have in the past. And so we sort of use this heuristic, this basic rule of thumb, that familiar equals safer. And so what's the trap here? The trap is that we've now become complacent. We're familiar with the river, and we've remembered successful river trips or runs down this particular rapid in the past, and they all look and feel the same. And so that's resulting in us underestimating the risk and not paying sufficient attention to changes in condition. This one was particularly acute to me. When I was planning this talk with Teresa and Paul, I thought about this one time on the Potomac, and there's a run down Great Falls that I was very familiar with, but I hadn't run it in a couple of years while my daughters were young. And I decided to put on without scouting it. And because I was familiar with it, and I I'd done it a million times, and there was a log stuck right in the middle of the crux of the move, and I got pinned on it. It brings to mind this, the kind of hackneyed quote from Heraclitus that you can't step in the same river twice. So even though you're familiar with the run, the river's always changing. It's a dynamic environment. All right, T, maybe move on to the next one. All right, acceptance. I kind of view this one as kind of the peer pressure heuristic. There's a deep wired human desire to be accepted, especially by people that we like and respect. And that leads us to engage in activities that will get us noticed or accepted. the trap here is that it causes us to overlook the warning signals and take greater risks, like run a rapid that everyone else has. The evidence has shown that, this is interesting, that more risks are taken in groups of mixed sex with both men and women. Although interestingly enough, women avoid groups that take greater risks. So just something to be aware of in terms of the data. Those of you who have, who remember, there was a fantastic article that the New York Times put together that recreated the decision-making at the Tunnel Creek accident at Stevens Pass several years ago. And I mean, there was a lot of heuristics in those poor decisions that resulted in 3 people dying from an avalanche that day. One of which was clearly this acceptance heuristic.
I actually interpret that a little differently. From my reading, my impression was that men in mixed groups are more prone to aggressive and risky behavior, and women are not prone to any such increase in risk-taking behavior.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
Yeah, but it makes sense. I've seen it
Yeah.
for sure. Okay. And I also, beginners, new people to a sport are a lot more susceptible to doing things that they don't really want to do just to be part of it.
Yeah, we'll get to it later, but there's sort of a related heuristic called social facilitation, which is basically gets to the point that when there are more people present, it kind of feels safer. And then the last thing I'll say on acceptance is there's sort of a related bias, I think they call it conformity bias, which is the desire for harmony or conformity can result in irrational or bad decision-making because you want to minimize conflict. Anything else there, T?
No, I'm not on that one. Paul, should I go back?
That's good.
Okay.
All right, let me click through these because we got a lot to cover. We're cognizant of not just sort of presenting the heuristics and the traps without giving some suggestions on tools to overcome them. So I'll try and get through my section pretty quickly. The consistency bias. This is essentially that subsequent decisions are easier if we maintain the consistency with previous decisions. So there's a powerful bias with sticking with what we've already decided to do, unless there's a compelling reason to change. So we default to what we've already decided. This impulse often leads to good results in our normal everyday life. Like you always hear about, in your personal finance, like not following the machinations of the stock market. I don't know how many of you we are considering, getting out of your 401ks when COVID hit and shorting the S&P 500, but clearly that would have been a very bad idea. Just another example of how consistency can be helpful heuristic in everyday life, but can be very perilous in whitewater. Again, the trap is we've already decided something, so we stick with the decision and we ignore new information that's coming in. A related heuristic here is commitment, which is, in my view, it's kind of closely related to this concept of sunk costs, the fallacy that you put a lot of effort and time into something, and the reality is those can't be recovered, and decisions should be made on future benefits, ignoring past costs. But we often think, oh, we just put a little bit more money or a little bit more time in this project because we've already committed to it. So the thing that I read about this heuristic is, every moment that you don't turn around for home, it becomes harder to do so.
Very true.
We've driven 4 hours to the put-in and hiked 2 hours in with our boats. We can't turn around now.
Right. We paid for the shuttle. We paid for the food pack. We're going.
Yeah. Sometimes the easiest point to make decisions about your day on the river is when you're still having breakfast, I think.
Mm-hmm. Which is one reason to delay the no-go decision as late as possible. It's one more reason to wait until the morning and check the gauge and then decide where you want to go.
Yep.
Speaking of, we've talked a lot about backcountry skiers, which these heuristics are modeled on. Those of you who do backcountry skiing, there's this fantastic YouTube channel by Cody Townsend, who's has this project called the 50, where he's trying to, well, he's knocked off most of them, the 50 great ski mountaineering descents in North America. What struck me about watching a lot of his videos is that here's clearly someone who has a lot of commitment. He's got a film crew, he's got, you know, partners. He has this 50 project that he wants to knock off in a couple of years. And a couple of his videos shows his decision-making process when the snow is warming, or there's they come across a wind slab and he turns around, and they show that as part of the 50 project. And I found that to be super valuable in terms of educating people about, you know, not sticking with your plan when conditions are changing and you should be turning back.
All right. There we go.
All right, this is kind of an easy one. I think it's pretty intuitive to most people. This is, you know, trusting the expert or informal leader who winds up making decisions for everybody that aren't necessarily good ones. So the trap here is trusting an expert when your own risk assessment, you're subordinating it, and it might be better or certainly more accurate to your own personal decisions and skill level and, you know, ability on that particular day. Beginners, I think, are more vulnerable to this. You know, I think, you know, often we associate high degree of skill, like a class 5 boater, with a high degree of competence in leadership and group dynamics. And so I think that's another trap you can fall into with the experts.
Mm-hmm. I have been on both sides of this heuristic, and the one that sticks out in my memory was I was going to take a couple of girlfriends floating on the San Juan River, and one of my girlfriends had this boyfriend who had a great tan and bulging muscles and a sparkly helmet and a playboat, and I thought he was going to be helpful in helping me take my friends down the San Juan. And then we get to the San Juan, and I wasn't very much of an expert myself. I didn't even check the gauge first. And when we got there, it was running 20,000 CFS, and there were trees going downstream. But I had a little commitment going on there. I wasn't going to turn back. So we went ahead and launched, high water be damned. And Mr. Danny with the sparkly helmet turned out to be a beginner in fancy gear. He was no help at all. So I was totally fooled by his appearance. So it doesn't have to be one person that's claiming to be an expert. It's just anyone that you put your trust in without really knowing whether you should be trusting them. So be careful who you trust.
Great point.
And when people tell me that they think everything's going to be fine because I'm there, I just want to say, I can't protect you. You know, it is beyond my power to make it safe for you. I would love to, but I cannot. It's not a safe endeavor. So either side of that is dangerous. Yeah,
one of the rules that they teach you in the avalanche class is that everyone gets a veto on the trip. So it requires that you don't put your judgment in someone else's hands. All right, 2 more, and then I'll turn it over to how to deal with these heuristic traps, or a couple more heuristic traps and how to deal with them. This is pretty easy to think about. It's, you know, hey, this river rarely runs. I want to get to it, and it causes you to ignore, you know, the fact that you maybe you're having a bad day, or maybe the water's too high. And then the next one, T, social facilitation. This is one we kind of talked a little bit about before, but it's everybody's doing it. It must be okay. Kind of makes some intuitive sense for, you know, we're social creatures, humans are, but you know, you see boaters that put in, you're like, oh, okay, this must be a safe run, and it causes you to turn off your system 2 thinking and just go with system 1 and put on yourself.
All right, this is the one Rainey was just talking about. If others are doing it, it's both desirable and safe. And this tendency in humans leads us to the risky shift, which has to do with the fact that groups take bigger risks than individuals or pairs of people would ever take. because groups are more like, well, Joe says it's okay, and if he says it's okay, maybe it is. And that whole process plays out into groups doing some really nutty things sometimes. The availability heuristic is whatever's top of mind is what's more likely to be your course of action. And the more stressed out you are, the more things you forget. And so whatever you can remember is what you're going to do. And my story to illustrate this is the time that I was on the Russell Fork and I was out of my boat at Climax taking pictures of my friends, and my visor on my helmet was dripping on my camera. So I took off my helmet and I set it down on the rocks. And then when everybody had finished running, I needed to get in my boat and run the rapid. So I packed up my camera, stuck it in the boat, jumped in the boat, ran the rapid, and didn't realize that I had not put on my helmet until the water splashed my head at the bottom of the drop. Yeah, that was a bad one. So my helmet was like the third thing on my mind, and it wasn't available to me. So it's a reason to use checklists for one thing. Anything to add? No. Optimism bias. This is what some of us do on purpose. We cultivate an optimistic viewpoint in order to not be so anxious in life. And sometimes you can cultivate that viewpoint to the point where you're not thinking hard enough about what might go wrong, that you're prepared for it. This is a favorite of mine. This is the Gorilla Rapid on the green, and look at the safety that's been set down below that rapid. They've got all those frogmen ready to jump in and grab you and pull you out of the river if you're the one boating it. People will take greater risks when there is safety set for them than they would if they didn't have safety set for them. So they're compensating for the fact that the safety is set and it's reducing their risk by taking greater risks. So here's time for you guys to chip in and tell us, what do you think are some of the biggest risk factors for falling into a heuristic trap? You can type it all into the chat window if you can find it. Who can see the chat window? There it is. Are we getting some good answers?
Exhaustion.
In a hurry, youth, inexperience, fatigue.
Stepping it up.
Stepping it up.
Yeah. FOMO.
Oh, huge.
Yeah. My buddy ran it. Yeah. It's a big group. It'll be safe. Absolutely. All of these are so true. And there's lots more. I have a brainstorm up here too. Macho.
Being rushed.
Right? Time pressure is such a big one.
Yeah, Kim, that's a good one. Friends waiting on me to Portage.
Yeah, we read Deep Survival. It is good. What's YOLO?
You only live once.
Okay.
Which might be true if you.
Boo, have you done that? Launched without a PFD.
Oh, no.
Good.
I was with somebody that did.
Okay.
And I should have said, don't, nuh-uh. She said no.
Don't do it. It's okay.
And it became a bad situation, turned out. I'll tell you about it someday.
All right. We do want to hear about it.
Mambo, I don't know. Mambo, I know I see your hand, but I am I'm an inexperienced Zoom facilitator. I don't know what to do with your raised hand. What does it mean? I'm not ignoring you.
Okay. All right. Oh, I see. Mambo wants to talk.
Ah,
Mute.
I'm okay with that.
Mambo is not muted.
Okay.
Mambo, why don't you send me a direct message and I'll try to.
Am I muted now?
No, you're not
You're
muted.
talking.
Okay, well, I did the Zoom hand up thing, and I'm sorry that you had to ignore me, but that's fine. The conversation was great. But it was back in the Halo question. I had an experience during an ACA instructor swiftwater rescue training just recently. where we were set up as, I don't know how many people here are familiar with that process, but anyway, we're going through, you know, setup scenarios. And what happened was, in a group of relatively well experienced, well trained, well, you know, good people, a person, you know, immediately saw the situation and dedicated themselves as leader. And pretty much everybody else went, well, there's a lot we don't know. We got a pin person out here. Now it's a scenario. It wasn't a real time thing. But we got to, like, there's a lot more to assess here. And so while that person, you know, immediately assumed the leadership role, other people began doing what was needed to be done. And so when that guy, I don't know his name on the video screen, Rainey was talking about, you know, how people work and those decisions. What happened was people kind of got independent of the quote unquote rescue leader, yet the rescue leader maintained that role. And as long as that decision fit what everybody else was kind of thinking, it worked. Now, again, this was a scenario, it wasn't real. And it turned out very well. We all got very high marks on the various roles we filled. But it was one of those things where there was this unspoken thing going on. And I really like that part of it. Was maybe in another piece where, you know, you're talking about the different levels of thinking and who's reacting first and who's thinking about it. And I think that fits into that scenario somehow. And I just wanted to add that piece to what Rainey had said. Thanks.
Thank you, Mombo. Now I know.
Very cool.
All right, Teresa, you guys should take over again.
All right, we're going.
All right.
Onward. So we've talked about all these traps, and we've talked about here's a brainstorm of risk factors for falling into a trap, and I'm sure there's lots more. So watch yourself. Let's talk some about how to recognize traps and how to get out of them once you've found them. I can't read this slide because the chat window's in the way, so somebody else take it.
So, oops. So the process, recognize, we've defined the traps here. Next step is recognizing the traps. Not always super easy, but we'll talk a little bit more about that in the upcoming slides. There's sometimes it's based on feelings, sometimes it's based on just things being out of place. If you are able to identify it, and maybe it's you, maybe it's somebody else in the team, you know, and encouraging some critical thinking with teamwork often helps with recognizing a trap. Basically, then you got to try to work your way out of it. In many cases, that's recognizing that you need to reset the team's direction. Sometimes working your way out of the trap is simply returning from system one to more to conscious thinking. It seems like maybe half the time, something like that. Just recognizing that the group's in trouble is enough. In other cases, it may be tougher. You know, both 1 and 2, I think, are in the moment. If you're experienced with some of this stuff, veteran paddler, maybe you've got a lot of experience with in the moment reactions, and this is, you know, something that you can guide the team out of more quickly. If not, you're more of a beginner, intermediate, ask for help. The good news is the tough news is this is a test and it's in the moment. The good news is it's open book and you can ask for help. So a lot of times the best thing in this case is if you just detect that something's wrong, ask for help, ask for a timeout, ask for people to think a little bit differently, and then circle back. I think that's such an important thing. So it is kind of ironic that you take the test first and afterwards you're given a chance to study. But the good news is, if you have a long and happy paddling career, this isn't just a process, it's a cycle. You do 1, 2, 3, you study, you apply the system 2, and back again you go. So hopefully throughout your career, you get better and better at recognizing, escaping, and then applying system 2 to continue your learning progression. Okay, so red flags. all different types of red flags. I guess if traps were easy to recognize, we might just call them roadblocks or something, or signs, but they're traps. So sometimes it's tricky to get out of them. In some cases, though, a lot of us have our spidey senses that sort of get triggered when something's wrong. We talked earlier about the definitions of traps. For me, it's when my decisions don't hold up to scrutiny. Sometimes I project myself into the future and imagine myself defending a decision. If I can't do that, if I can't answer questions, then I might be stuck in a trap. A lot of us get anxious feelings, uneasy. We talked about being rushed also. That's kind of that makes my spidey senses go off a little bit if I feel that way. Being overloaded by a lot of new things or sometimes new people. Some of us react differently in different groups. So being overloaded, I think, is an important concept because in some ways it makes it tougher to find traps. And also, if your brain is also working at max capacity, it could even make it harder to get out of traps. We'll talk a little bit more about that later, but I call that one out separately because I think if you recognize your own signs of being overloaded, that's a good reason to stop and pause. Recognizing things are different, but acting the same. I think it was Lee Baker's podcast, right? They talked about thinkers, doers, feelers, and observers. Some people may be more likely to pick up on the feelings. I think some people may be better though at observing the situation. And that's C. If a lot of times if things are different, you see lots of, the river level is different, the weather's different, the paddling cadence is different as far as how the trip team's being managed, but everybody acts the same as if nothing's changed. If an observer sees that, that might be a red flag to call out. In general, if you see things that are different with the situation, hopefully you see different behavior as well. And then for me, when I get overloaded or when might be falling into a trap, I get a little complacent. I have kind of a weird combination maybe of being rushed, but also feeling complacent. One of the longest times I spent underwater, probably upside down in a boat, it was on the Foot of the Foo. I was getting ready to do a rapid called Más o Menos. I had just done a couple of higher sections on the river and was feeling really good about myself, confident, maybe confidence trap. And I also knew that, boy, if I just got these last two big rapids out of the way, what a nice goal. I'd go home and I'd sit in the hot tub and it'd be a great evening. And then the leader of the trip was describing the first move, the entry move. And I was tired. It'd been a long day. I felt a little rushed. I wanted to get home. So you're probably hearing lots of hot tub on the river. I borrowed one. I was having lots of red flags. I was having lots of traps maybe that I might be falling into. And the last thing I said before I hit the line or tried to hit the line was, I'm not quite sure I understand this beta, but whatever, everything's worked out fine so far. And I blew the first move and just hole after hole upside down. The good news is it worked out fine. I rolled up at the bottom, was all happy. But just because it worked out doesn't mean that I did the right thing there. And I had a nice, smart leader he actually called a timeout on me and said, hey, good job digging yourself out of that hole, but don't, think differently next time. So that was there's a lot of good lessons for me there. If you're ever paddling with me and you hear me say whatever with respect to the rapid, you have my permission to find the nearest corner and ask me to stand in it because I probably need a timeout. So I don't know, Rainey, Teresa, signals do you guys see for traps?
Oh,
These are good ones. Yeah, I mean, we're going to get to this concept of getting used to bad habits or normalization of deviance, which I think, Paul, you hit on. You get to the bottom of a rapid, and if you don't evaluate why it went wrong, you may sort of get used to that bad decision making, in this case complacency, and really fighting it. I think you're exactly right. You need to get yourself out of the trap. It requires very active effort to stop the momentum of the trap that you're in.
Right. And a lot of times, when I look at accident reports, there's often people see red flags. This didn't seem right. This didn't feel right, but they weren't quite comfortable. They didn't know how to speak up, for example. think it's important to realize that if you do see red flags, you don't need to know exactly what to do. You don't need to be the expert in the group. I think your goal is to just jumpstart some good thinking. You can do that by asking for a timeout. Some people speak up more easily in groups, some of the extroverts. Some people don't. You know, I tend to be an introvert. I'm perfectly happy to keep my mouth shut all day long, but I also recognize that, you know, if you're a leader of a group, you need to say what the team what the team needs to hear. So sometimes I think ahead for words and phrases that can help reset the direction of the team. There's a few of them listed up here. There are different scripts that work for different people. I call them scripts, basically words and phrases that you kind of keep in your back pocket, that when you're nervous, if you're anxious, you can just pull those out. One of my favorites is asking for help. I really like that because a lot of times it causes other people in the group to start thinking outside themselves. And a lot of times that's enough to say, hey, let's change the thinking. Let's look at it from somebody else's perspective. Somebody needs some attention or whatnot. So I could just say, hey, I need some help. I don't feel great. Can you guys help me think through this? And then there's different versions of that. You know, if the day's different, you ask to revisit your plans or whatnot, but different words and phrases that work for you. The goal, again, isn't necessarily to solve everything. It's to call a timeout and encourage the team to engage in some critical thinking.
System 2.
Yep.
Paul, the only thing I might add is, you know, there's again, I'm referring back to this article in the New York Times. Actually, this was one that was last year, and it was a woman who had just taken an ARI 1 class. And her take on avoiding heuristic traps is, you know, decision-making by all individuals, constant communication, and interestingly enough, emotional vulnerability. So empathy helps us learn. And that can be a hard one for kind of whitewater libertarians who may be prone to think, you know, never cave into the mediocrity of groupthink. But you know, that can lead to these just getting more and more entrenched in these traps and bad behaviors.
Yeah, that's interesting. Could you add a little detail to the emotional vulnerability side?
Well, you know, Teresa, who was the paddler who did the first ascent of the Sang-Po? Scott Lundgren, who wrote that article. Yeah, he wrote this article in Outside Magazine. Basically, the philosophy is harden the F up. And, you know, I think a lot of paddlers sort of have that, and it sort of may attract some to the sport, may repel others, but it sort of is this attitude that can, you know, you're not emotionally available, you don't practice empathy, and, you know, you're not open to hearing other people's perspectives.
Well,
I like that.
In his case, wasn't it cancer that caused him to finally have empathy for himself?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, for me, my way of detecting when something's not right is to do a body scan. I feel my breathing, I feel my heart, I feel my gut, I feel my energy level, and that tells me if things are going well or not.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic practice, and also, you know, there are a lot of techniques for active listening. You know, oftentimes you are hearing people, but you're not actually listening to them. So there's a lot of studies and techniques you can use to become a better listener.
Ready for the next one?
Yes. Yeah, I like the emotional vulnerability side of it. Sometimes I'm following on trips, sometimes I'm leading. When I am leading, I'm happy to let people know if I'm scared, or if, you know, if I'm processing something or I'm thinking through something. I think if you do try to distance yourself too much with some idea of expertise, I think it can kind of clamp down on healthy communication. Okay, so speaking of critical thinking and open communication, when I started my career, I was a junior engineer. I remember if I'd walk into a meeting room and if I had a marginal idea and I said, hey team, what do you think? They'd give me a pretty blunt and honest critique, good critical thinking. Later on, I was a leader of the group. I was vice president of engineering. If I walked into a room with a marginal idea and said, hey guys, what do you think? I think this might be cool, but I got a lot of vertical head movement, and I realized that at that point, I really needed to be careful on how I phrased questions if I wanted to encourage critical thinking. If you're in a position of leadership, and honestly, a lot of times, even if you're the first one to speak, if you imply judgment, or you say, this is going to be great, that kind of steers the team in one direction. Maybe that's exactly the right thing to do. Maybe you want to be in a supportive mode, but if you're encouraging if your goal is to encourage critical thinking, might not be what you want. I also was a little bit cautious of yes/no questions when I was pursuing critical thinking, simply because a lot of times yes/no questions are an easy out for folks if they don't want to engage. In some cases, it might be perfect, but in other cases, maybe not what you want. Again, one of my favorites is asking for help. Can you guys help me think through this? I think asking for help kind of triggers a different perspective. People start to look at things from your point of view, or just more importantly, just a different point of view. And I think it helps with engagement. I saw somebody mention, how can we support you? I like that as well. In the chat, I saw that. Basically, it's a nice open-ended question that doesn't imply judgment, and in order to answer it honestly, you need to think a little bit. I think what's next? So we've talked about trap definitions. We've talked about recognizing traps a little bit, red flags. We've talked about different types of thinking, in the moment thinking, over coffee thinking, system 1, system 2. Here is an example from my paddling progression where I felt like all of these things kind of came into play, at least for me. When I started looking at some of the harder rapids, and it wasn't a super easy decision for me, do I want to run this or do I want to walk it? My system 1 thinking as a paddler anyways, wasn't super well developed. I mean, it's still developing, but at the time, the thoughts that came into my head and the gut reactions, the gut feelings were very cluttered. The left and the right hand side of this picture is a lot of example thoughts that might have popped into my head as I was first starting to sort through this. The leader said I'd be okay. Maybe that's an expert halo thing. Will they care if I walk? That might be a trap. And by the way, nobody cares if you walk. Someone said it was easy. Somebody said it was hard. There's some social traps potentially there. And then my brain had lots of random tangencies too, many of which were most of which were completely unhelpful. So I recognized that this was a challenge for me. I recognized that I needed to do some system 2 and system 2 development, basically sit down over a warm beverage and think about some more constructive thoughts that I would like to become habit for me. So a couple years after this picture, in the next slide, I came up with some criteria that work for me. This won't work for everybody, but the point here is there was a lot of cycles between system 1 and system 2, and I started to come up with some questions that at least were more constructive and help guide me through this decision of whether or not I should run a rapid. So for me, I'm an engineer, so I like to understand things first, and then ask myself, do I have the skills? Do I have a good safety plan? Am I okay with plan B? I generally insert a question at the end that says, am I running this rapid for me? That was specifically designed to keep me out of what do we call it? One of the earlier social traps. I'm blanking on it at the moment, but basically, the acceptance trap. And my wife and I, she's actually my main paddling partner. We actually kind of turned this into a game to make it more of a habit for us. We played a game called Nervous or Scared. So at any time we can point at one another and say, hey, nervous or scared. And we each have our own criteria. Hers are different than mine. I think she likes 1 or 2 of these maybe, but then she asked herself more about how she feels that day and sort of like the body check. And so we've kind of made this into more of a habit that's a lot more constructive than my thinking was some number of years ago. So no, Teresa and Rainey, you have quite a bit more experience. Like, how do you, imagine you're looking at a tough rapid, you've got some interesting criteria as well.
Yeah, I mean, I would only add, you look at sort of what the best athletes do when they get into clutch situations, and it's a move they've practiced
Mm-hmm.
in advance. And so when I'm on a river, I want to be doing my class 5 or class 4 moves in class 2 water with no consequences. So that when I get to the class 4 or 5 drop, I've been executing those moves all day. And the key system 2 thinking for me is accurately assessing how I'm boating on that particular day. What is the data? Am I hitting my class 4 moves on class 2 water? I'm not a class 4 boater. Am I a class 4 boater on that day? How am I performing on that? Because we all have peaks and valleys of performance. And so that's what I would encourage people to think about is try your tough moves before there are consequences on that day.
Nice.
I have more to say about this later, so I'm not going to say it now.
Okay.
But the point is, I think that basically each of us are going to have our own criteria for when we decide to run a rapid and when we decide not to run it. And I've made all of the mistakes you can make, I think, in this department. This rapid is one that the first time I ever saw this rapid, it's on the lower wind. It's called the Flume. It's in Washington State. I saw this rapid and I was like, I'm not running that. That looks awful. And I shouldered my boat and I started carrying my boat down the right bank where you see people there on shore. And it was a rainy day and it was slippery and I almost slid down those rocks and right into the rapid. And that scared me so much that the next time I was there, I ran it and it went well. So familiarity, I ran it again and again and again and again, and it kept going well until a few years later when it started not going so well. And I ended up getting concussed in there on 2 separate days. And now I'm walking it again. And my new rule is I'm not going to run a rapid just because I hate the portage. I'm going to ask for help. So that's one rule.
Nice. Okay. So we're talking a lot about decisions, recognizing tough situations, extracting ourselves from tough situations, and different types of thinking. I think it's helpful to consider whether we're creating situations for ourselves that overload our brain right out of the gate, or if we're creating situations for ourselves that give us a little extra mental headroom, so to speak. So we've got a little extra bandwidth when we create our river days. So the next few slides I think are about that. When I'm thinking through creating a day on the river, one of the things I learned in my business training, and it's been reinforced as I teach different things and go through life, is that most people can handle 2 mental challenges at once. They may be able to do 5 or 10 things at once, but typically only if that's an ingrained habit. If there's actually something that needs serious mental attention and is maybe new or unfamiliar, usually 2 is the magic number I've found. If you ask me to do 3 things that are new and uncomfortable to me, I can almost guarantee you that I'm going to screw up all 3 and probably create some collateral damage at the same time. So 2 is a magic number for me. So when I'm thinking about setting up a day on the water, I count the challenges. River typically always gets number 1. Mother Nature, sometimes she'll give me a soft pitch, but sometimes she throws a curveball, and I like to have a mental slot reserved in case Mother Nature does what Mother Nature often does, which is surprise me. So I count new things, new challenges. Could be a new crew member, could be high water, could be someone stepping up in difficulty. It could be all kinds of things. The list is probably, I do a lot of single day trips. I would imagine, Teresa, you do a lot of multi-day trips. If it's a multi-day trips, the possible, extra things you've got to think about, that list really probably grows and grows.
Sure. Probably the most challenging +1 thing is the people involved. And so if you choose your crew well, you can really save yourself a lot of stress.
Right. So I count to 2. If I get less than 2, that means I probably have a little extra mental bandwidth. Those are usually the days where I might do river play. I might do teaching. I might enjoy the scenery a little bit more. If I get to exactly 2, that's probably about my mental limit. So I don't do that's not a play day for me. That's a focus on the challenges. For example, river plus, let's say, somebody who's stepping up in difficulty. So I'm going to focus on that. If I count and I get to 3 or more, I'm going to need help. I can't do that. The good news is, though, if it's a paddling crew, you have more than one brain. So that's when I pay a little extra attention. Let's say if it's a higher water, someone stepping up in difficulty, and it just rained last night. I'm going to be more deliberate in that case, particularly assigning roles within the group. I'm going to be more deliberate about who's sweep. Is there a buddy system? Is there somebody up front who's going to look for high water or wood or whatnot? I'm going to be a lot more deliberate in who does what in the crew. So next slide is similar thought about giving yourself extra bandwidth, mental bandwidth. I came across from ice climbing and mountaineering, were my sports before kayaking. My crews typically were 2 people total, sometimes 3, depending on whether it was an ice route or a mountaineering route. When I started kayaking, particularly as a beginner or early intermediate, a lot of times I'd be standing at the river, meeting 5, 10 more new people. Sometimes that worked out wonderfully, and it was just a great cohesive group that just worked together great. Other times it could be very uncomfortable. So I wanted to process that. I went home for a little system 2. I'm an engineer. I pulled out the graph paper and I came up with something like this. I realized that what I cared about was the cohesiveness of the groups and how skilled they were also with respect to the river. So top right, cohesive groups that work well together and they have the skills that match up well to the river. I recognize that those were my most comfortable days typically. The yellow boxes, top left, bottom right, crews that are either cohesive or highly skilled for the river, but not both. I became more comfortable recognizing that, and I came up with specific actions and specific behavior that I associated with each of those, and I could handle that. I felt like I had to pay more attention, but I felt like I had the bandwidth to do that. The red group in the bottom left, after some thinking, I realized that nearly all of my tough experiences on the water with at least with the team aspect was when it was a group that didn't have cohesive teamwork and wasn't comfortable running that water. In that case, I was very deliberate in thinking about my scripts, because a lot of times, sometimes you show up, especially you're beginner, early intermediate, you might recognize that, but you're not sure what to do about it. So again, a little more over coffee type thinking, system 2 for me. I came up with 2 scripts that work for that. One script is, I raise my hand and I say, guys, we're feeling a little divided. Maybe we should divide up into 2 groups and work that. If that doesn't work, I make a graceful exit. I have a second script that says, guys, I'm not feeling it today. I'm going to head home. Is there anything I can do to help before I leave? So one thing, it's one thing too to be able to predict this. It's another thing to be able to react to it. And it's yet a third good thing if you can steer it in advance. So I'll tell a little story there. I woke up some number of months ago. I woke up after a rain and I was having breakfast, looked at my phone, and my friends there's a group text that's going back and forth. We're thinking, should we do a group? There's a nice, class 4 river that we were interested in and a class 3 river that we were interested in. And I watched the text go back and forth. I saw who was interested and I thought, there's a couple people in the group that are probably a little less comfortable in the class 4, but if we have good teamwork, we'll be okay. And then I saw some more people chime in and I saw the group start to form up and I realized, based on this team dynamic, this team will probably get a little fragmented. There were different paddling styles. Some people like to paddle fast, some people like to paddle slow. So I realized that if the group chooses the class 4 option, I was going to be in the fragmented and a little bit uncomfortable zone. And I thought, good job, Paul. You're getting really good at predicting how the day is going to go. I hope the team makes the right decision. And I went back to eating breakfast. 5 minutes later, I thought, you ding-a-ling, what are you thinking? Now is the time when you can steer this. Don't hope that the group makes the right decision to give you an easier day. Get on the phone, speak up, give the input such that you can steer what type of day you have before you ever leave the house. So
Very true.
the third thing, so recognizing it's good, reacting is probably, knowing how to react is probably even better, but steering it in advance. It takes me some practice. I'm still working on it, but part of the progression.
Mhm.
So skill relative to the river. It's one of the, I think that's the bottom axis.
Mhm.
And just
Yeah.
I'll speak a little bit about that as the third topic of preparing a day that is less difficult rather than more difficult. So in the next slide, it's the example of, is somebody ready for that river? Again, the topic is, are you setting yourself up for a tough day? And maybe you want to do that, but it's good to recognize it. Or are you setting yourself up for a day where you've got more mental bandwidth left over for good decisions, recognizing traps, those sorts of things. In this example, there's a little bar graph there. I like to recognize that boaters aren't a single grade. To me, somebody isn't a class, necessarily just a class 3 boater, class 4 boater, or whatever, where we are a combination of skills and abilities that are each probably developing at different paces. So in this example, I break it out into 5 different categories. To be honest, you could probably easily break it out into 10. I know many of us think of a variety of skills that we want to develop, but for here, I looked at boat control. And this example paddler has 3+ boat control. Maybe they're comfortable rolling in 2+ water. River reading is mid-level. And then I like to break out safety and rescue separately. Safety, I think of as critical thinking, communication, proactive actions that hopefully keep us out of accidents. And then rescue is, to me at least, is if things don't go as you planned, how do you react to that? So if I'm planning a day, and let's say that this graph represents a buddy of mine that we want to take on the river, maybe. If I'm planning a day, taking them on a class 3+ river that looks like the top picture, if I have a good crew that is comfortable with some rescue, I might be okay with that. That might be a yellow colored day where I'm kind of mentally loaded, but I'll probably sign up for that. Bottom picture is just about the exact same rating of a rapid. It's also roughly 3+, but you can see it's sustained. Boulder Gardens, if you flip there, you've got to be able to roll in 3+. So I would feel very differently about that. Honestly, I probably wouldn't sign up for that, for taking a buddy on that. But as you can see, it's not just about matching a class 3 boater to a class 3 rapid. You can look a little more deeply at the layers there and recognize if you're gonna be signing up for a challenging day that's a little tougher or an easier day. And then the last thing I'll say on this particular graph is, probably a lot of you guys noticed right off the bat, is noticing imbalances. This boater might feel comfortable on class 3+ water as long as things didn't go wrong. But I'll kick this over to the safety chair now and say this paddler probably needs a little bit of training. What do you think, Teresa?
I think we should take him on a class 2 run, or maybe 20 class 2 runs.
Yep.
And get him to do some class 4 moves.
So yeah, I think if there are imbalance, and I manage my own development kind of this way. I've got probably 8 or 10 different bars that I think are important, and it's kind of, the more imbalance I see, that means that the less, what's the right way to say it? If I have a lot of imbalances, it's more likely that I'm going to run into a situation where I'm not properly prepared and I get overloaded.
Mm-hmm. And you don't have as much fun when you're overloaded.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think a lot of anxiety probably stems from having some of these skills that don't match the situation that people are learning.
Mhm. Mhm. Let's see.
Okay.
What's next? Anything else to add, Paul? That's the end of your slides, isn't it?
That's the bulk of it. Yep.
Okay, I'm going to go pretty fast through the next set of slides, maybe even skip a few because we're well over an hour already. And I'm sure some people need to get on with their lives. But there is a final section of this talk that I really want to cover. So I'm going to blitz through a few. Strong skills increase your bandwidth for dealing with challenges. And what I mean by that is that if you can roll really well, then you don't have to think about it and you can just roll up and keep going. Or if you know how to set up a vector pole, you can just do it. You don't have to look it up in a book. So the more you practice and the more you study and the more you train, the more you'll be able to do all of the basics without thinking about them. And that's part of getting to be a better paddler. Well, I love this slide, but I'm going to skip it. A mental game. How confident are you? It's possible to be overconfident or underconfident. And it's important for you to ask yourself the question, which am I? Am I realistic about my self-assessment, as Paul was talking about? Or am I ignoring some things that I really need to pay attention to? Communicate early and often. It cannot be overstated. You begin before you ever get to the river. You continue at the put-in. Ideally, people would check in at the put-in. Ideally, people would check in at each major rapid or drop and have a plan before they even got there. Ideally, people would debrief after a trip if anything went wrong or even threatened to go wrong, to discuss it and figure out what mistakes did we actually make and how can we do better next time. So the more that we communicate, the better we get at planning ahead for the next time. Roles, this is really obvious to a point, but basically everyone on the trip is capable of helping out in some kind of situation. Lead and sweep, everyone knows what those are. Safety manager would be the person who can be relied on to say, this situation isn't right, we need to do something different. An incident commander would be the person who can interface with sheriffs and EMTs and rescue personnel and can speak their language. That would be an ideal incident commander, and also someone who's a good, strong thinker. The go person is a person who has a rescue life jacket and is willing to jump in the river and grab somebody and get hauled back out. Downstream safety would be people who are willing to go downstream and fish everybody else out of the river. So downstream safety would be people who are able to get down there without needing rescue, ideally. Third position, some people say or use that term to speak of where you would put the weakest paddler in a group, so that they are not at the front, not at the back, somewhere in the middle where they have the best support. And the wild card, if you don't know who the wild card is, it's you. A wild card is a person that you don't know what they're going to do. They might be new to you, or they might be somebody that you know is a wild card and they've always been a wild card and you still don't know what they're going to do. So all of these roles are can be held by more than one person. More to say about that, guys? No, good. Remember the option to not launch. Not launching, that is one way you can vote with your feet. And it is really a good option. And what I've learned is that whenever I am at the put-in or somewhere close to a river and I'm thinking I'm going to launch, if I decide not to go, other people join me. So usually if I decide not to go, there's probably some problems with the situation. All right, we're to the final section. Yay! We renamed this Getting Used to Bad Habits, but really it's called, what is it, Rainey? Oh, normalization of deviance.
Yep. Yeah. So that was sort of this fancy term for, actually it happened after it was the 86 Challenger explosion, where engineers got used to testing the limits on launching in colder conditions beyond the technical specifications of the O-rings. And they thought they could get away with it, and then they didn't. And that concept applies to whitewater boating, where if you don't suffer the consequences of a bad decision, you'll get used to that bad decision, and then it will become normal, and it'll eventually catch up with you.
Mm-hmm. And I chose this picture because it's a place where we have typically run this set of small waterfalls one after another without setting any safety, but then things started going wrong. There's right behind where I'm standing as the photographer, there's a really rocky, bony, nasty slide, and a person got stomped in the hole where that green boat is about to go, ended up swimming and didn't come up to the surface until he was headed into the next drop. And there was no one standing there with a rope in their hands. And so he ended up swimming over that next drop, and he was not a young man, and it was hard on him. Very unpleasant situation. And that's the kind of thing that it would be so easy for us to just change our behavior and fix it. And all similarly, we could signal so that people wouldn't run the drop when someone else is still in the hole. So we've been getting used to being slack at this location, but perhaps we could do better. Here's the wicked environment is part of this whole scenario. The fact that something doesn't usually go wrong, we get away with it most of the time, makes it easy for us to ignore the possibility that maybe we should have a better safety setup. So I made a new rule for myself: set shore-based safety when the drops are stacked. When it's possible that somebody will get stopped in one drop and have to swim the next one just because nobody was standing there with a rope, that's not a good enough reason for them to have to swim that. So I'll be the one getting out on the rope, and hopefully I'll paddle with people that'll be willing to get out on shore and hold a rope too. So this smaller print on this one, but what are your safety standards? We want to encourage you to develop your own safety standards. Pick rules for yourself, talk with your crew about it. If you're doing something routinely that's actually kind of lazy and not really very safe, maybe you need to make a new rule about that and change your behavior. And then every time something goes wrong, talk it out. Go have a beer, talk it out. Park your pride somewhere. If it was you that made the mistake, I've made every single mistake in the book, and I'm still here, so I got away with it. Thank you, wicked environment.
I started asking this, I run a lot of the same river over and over again. So protecting against familiarity traps, I've started asking crews in general, even if things don't go wrong, hey, what'd you think about today? Or any observations. And I also have recognized that if I do have the opportunity to paddle with somebody I'm not familiar with, that's kind of often especially useful to ask them in kind of an open, critical thinking sort of way. What'd you notice about how we ran the river today that stuck out in your head? So basically just getting the value of different perspectives on your own habits.
Mm-hmm. Rainey?
Totally agree.
Okay. It's your life. The bottom line is that the more that we can recognize these very human tendencies that we all share, the better we can help each other and also help extricate ourselves when we're falling down into a trap and increase our safety margins across the board.
Amen. Yeah, I think the goal is that you become more familiar with these traps, and then it leads to better decisions and a safer experience for you and your friends.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I saw some questions, at least one question from a beginner perspective. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Even if you're standing in front of Dane Jackson, you're still the expert in how you feel that day. That gives you license to speak up, ask questions. You're going to have to make judgments. You're going to have to learn. You're probably going to have to make mistakes. But don't be afraid to speak up and ask for help.
All right. Thank you, guys. That was wonderful. I see we have a lot of questions, and yes, I'll happily post the deck. I saw that.
Teresa, Leanne wants you to go back to the slide that you.
Go back to the slide I skipped. All right. Let me see if oh God. All right. I'm going to have to do something here. Forgive me. This is what I have to do to get rid of the chat window. So what this is the conscious competence grid. taken to the next level. This is the Knowles version, which integrates the idea that you can still have beginner mind. The conscious incompetence is beginner mind. You can still have that even after you're a master. You continue to cycle through from not knowing what you know to knowing what you don't know, to having to pay attention to perform a skill, to being so good at it that you don't have to pay attention anymore, and then realizing in the reflective competence stage what else there is to learn. I can't look at the chat and look at the slides, so.
You're just simply getting, Teresa, tons of nicely done, excellent job, et cetera, not so much questions.
Okay.
Though where did our Mambo
Oh,
go?
Mambo's hand is up there still.
I'm unmuting him. I've learned my lesson.
Is that a high five or a raised hand? I can't tell.
That's great.
Both, Paul. It's both.
There you
Awesome.
go.
I'll start out with the usual Oscar stuff. This is awesome that you guys are doing this. Thank you to all involved. And I don't even know who they are. But here I go. It started with Paul's comment about class 4 boaters are assumed to be able to run all class 4s. I remember back in the day, 20 years ago, class 3 water killed class 5 boaters because of the complacency aspect.
That's a total heuristic trap. You're absolutely right.
Well said, Randy. Well said. But the other side of that is for newbies to advance. Now, I'm an old, oh God, I guess a class 4. I mean, I ran the Hell's Corn on the Klamath, white salmon back in the day. Because of divorce and kids, I've been off the water for a while, but now I'm back. But for newbies to advance, we need you guys to take us along. And I loved what Teresa said about, those skilled boaters need to invest to run class 2 waters with class 2 boaters and run class 4 stuff. Can you catch that eddy? Can you do this? Can you follow that line? Can you avoid? I mean, that is the investment of the skilled boaters in our community need to make to our sport, because that's what brings us along. I mean, I am 65 years old. I'm getting back into it. Excuse me, Teresa?
I said, welcome back.
Well, I've always loved rivers. I've loved skiing. Okay. So you guys need to make the investment in those underskilled boaters. And I like what Teresa said. You don't need to do it on the white salmon. You can do it on the class 2 river and go, look, this is how you catch an eddy. No, you screwed up that time. No, you do this, and that's a huge piece of it.
We're doing it.
One of the commonalities.
We're doing skill builders in the canoe club.
Thank you for that. We are doing Paul Radke of I belong to the WKCC. Paul Radke, Dave Peterson. They've been doing a lot this year, especially with the C19 thing, and I'm so thankful for that. And the last thing is there's a commonality between all of this great work you've done. You still got this graph up that's incredible, and that is the commonality is complacency. It gets back to that old thing about class 3 water kills class 5 boaters. When you get used to something, when you get, what's his name? When Paul talked about, he'd done this river a gazillion times and he hadn't been it for years. Well, yeah, the river is dynamic. It always changes. And you have to, if you get complacent, that's one of the first red flags. When I feel comfortable on a river, no matter the conditions, red flag. It's like, whoa, okay, where's my head? And that's all I wanted to say. Thank you again for just doing this. Thank you all.
Oh, we're having fun.
Yeah, so much. Teresa, actually, speaking of us doing this, go to your last slide. That's the one I want to see. You look like you did a nice.
Oh, the one with the grid. Oh, let me see.
Well, I was
one?
actually, nope, go one more. Thanks for joining us.
Yes.
So just mindful of the time for those, that need to sign off, of course. do so. We have recorded the talk. There's been a request for us to make the slides available, which I'm sure you all would do. I have no problem with making the slides available. Charlie wants a write-up for American Whitewater, to which I say, first Cascade Currents, excuse me very much. The
Yeah, tell him
publication
he can have the shore-based safety one first.
Yeah. But are there any other thoughts or questions from folks who have not had a chance to get their question answered? And I'll also check the chat, but just gonna lots of great
Deborah,
comments.
one point I'd make is,
Yeah.
our goal is not to sort of to tell people they shouldn't accept risk.
Yes.
It's to make sure they're matching up their risk tolerance with the actual risks they're facing. And, each of us have different risk tolerances. So, you have to sometimes push to get better, you have to sometimes take on more risk or run more difficult water. We wanted to sort of take out any sort of judgment element to this talk and have people sort of just have a better understanding of their own individual risk decisions.
I was just reading through the questions and I found one from Eric Lee that says, why were the number of fatal accidents higher for small groups if those groups take fewer risks? Can you answer that, Rainey? Is that from a slide that I had?
Could I read that again?
Why were the number of fatal accidents higher for smaller groups if those groups take fewer risks? I don't know that it was the fact. Sorry, Eric Lee, I'll have to get back to you. Yeah,
I'm not sure. I don't know that data, but I would sort of, just from the heuristic side, I think there's, obviously each group is different, but these behavioral psychology would say there's more heuristic risk in larger groups because of acceptance, social facilitation, et cetera.
Yeah, I would need to see that data to see how they sliced it, but one question, or a couple of factors come to mind, and that is, there is the risk of something bad happening, and there's also the impact of that risk. Those two things might be different depending on the group size. For example, a smaller group may be less able to manage a difficult situation simply because there's not as many people to respond, but I'm speculating, I don't know.
Molly chimed in with, it was on the white slide with a graph and an article from 1968. And while you're pondering that, Aaron is also asking Rainey, what did you say, Aaron? Something along the lines of, Rainey, you've mentioned an article a few times, but maybe never the full title or the author.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So it's Ian McCammon. And let me get the right name for you. Heuristic Traps in Recreational Avalanche Accidents, Evidence and Implications. You Google Ian McCammon, MCCAMMON, you'll have tons of articles about his work.
I am not a professional, but I would say even a group of 3 or 4 or 5, you probably got 2 experts, you got some rookies, you got the same dynamics that this group talked about. Even though it's happening on a smaller scale, it's happening.
One of the things I was thinking about, Teresa and Rainey and Paul, is, you were talking about complacency and just generally getting comfortable in bad habits. And I'm wondering about how we get comfortable in our good habits. And the one thing that I didn't hear you talking a lot about was just the simple notion of making it a practice to practice every time, not, maybe not every time or every third time you go out with your group, like, hey guys, how about we, have some swimmers today and throw some, safety rope today, or how about we practice XYZ scenario. I mean, we show up, we don't have a safety talk, we put on, we boat, we take off, we drive home. You know, we could just build another half hour to develop our skills and get better skills and get more time on the water.
Mhm.
I think of that, Deborah, as how do you make a habit out of improving your habits?
Yeah.
And I mean, there's a lot of different ways I suppose you could tackle that. Well, I think one of them is just starting, make it a habit to assess how you're doing. Once a week, once a month after paddling, where do you need to be better?
Mhm.
Kind of, it goes also into the, Teresa and I and Rainey, I think have said this, the know thyself. Get in the habit of identifying areas that you want to improve and make a habit out of it. But I do like that topic. It's easier said than done, but it's nice if you can create habits around that improvement cycle.
I love it.
I think, the practicing rope skills is a sort of an under practice. I think that's just a fantastic idea, Deborah. Every other river trip, make sure your throw rope is functional and you practice, if you're not swimmers, the objects on the other bank or something.
Right.
Sure, or even just tossing the bag back and forth across the parking lot so you get used to the feel of it and you build up your system 1 ability to throw.
Yeah, or a rethrow, we practice throwing, but we never practice a rethrow. So watching the chats.
Is
Just
this the
like-
slide that was in question?
Yes, that's the slide that was in question.
Yeah. I apologize. It's been long enough since I read the paper and took this screenshot that I don't remember what the paper was called. I can find it though.
Play horse with the rope in the parking lot. Like the button, All right, y'all.
Yeah, I think that was good.
Not seeing any additional questions. We will see you all 2 weeks from tonight for our 3rd session in our 5-part river safety series with Charlie Walbridge, talking about accident reporting and why it's important and how it helps us learn. And I just want to say a huge thank you to Teresa and to Paul and to Rainey. You guys, it's hard for you. Paul, you can only do, I think, 2 things at once, maybe
2 new things.
2 new things.
Yes, ma'am.
I've been watching your presentation, reading the chats and trying to, help people get in. And I can tell you, unqualified success. You had people engaged the entire time, taking notes, anxious to get the slide deck, wanting to see the presentation again so they can really, absorb some of the information, do some level 2 thinking about what was shared tonight. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for attending, and thanks Teresa, Deborah and Rainey for the opportunity to get together.
For sure.
Yeah, look forward to see you guys on the water.
Good night, everyone.
Bye.
We're all going to be safer because of it. Hi, Leanne.
Bye, Leanne. There she goes. Oh, she's still there.
I saw her for a second.
Tom and Molly, you guys got to join the club. I see you. You can join as a single household, 2 people on 1 membership. It's going to be amazing.
Ah. Oh, there she went. Rainey's gone. Oh, I guess we can't go back into the waiting room, can we?
Go back. Why would we do? Oh, no. Like, why would we go back into the waiting room? Oh, I understand.
Promoted Lynn. I hope she learned something. I've got to figure out how to do screen sharing and chat window at the same time.
I know, Teresa, we both have still so much to learn.
So much to learn.
I can tell you with confidence, though, we recorded this one.
Yeah, I see it's still recording us.
Yeah, no, that's all right. Let's debrief. Let's do what Paul says. I feel like we did a good job by starting the speakers in the waiting room early.
Oops.
Yeah, that
Actually,
worked.
Deborah,
Yeah.
I think that was, I heard Rainey, I think Rainey chimed in and said debrief, but I don't think he's hearing us right now.
I think he's left the meeting.
Yeah, he somehow signed himself out.
Yeah.
Maybe we should, maybe.
Hey
we-
guys,
Yeah.
hi.
Hi.
My name is Sean. I'm way down in Eureka, California.
Hi,
It's
Sean.
not really logical for me to join the get full membership group up there. Is that way I can like pay a little guest fee and get the Noria Newman presentation?
Yeah.
Something like that.
So, the
For-
membership fee.
Buy one of you lunch sometime.
Yeah. The membership fee at $25 for the year is already sort of a guest fee, if you will. So we've got lots of folks joining from Ireland and Vermont and all over the place. So when you join, you have the option of saying, I'm really just here for the speakers and the presentations, or you can say, no, I want to paddle with the club all the time. So you would just sign up as I just am here for the speakers.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Who are some other upcoming speakers?
Oh, after Noria, we have Rafa Ortiz.
Ooh, cool.
Right.
Waterfall running.
It's
Sweet.
already worth your $25. You get Noria
I think so.
Newman, you
I'd
get
have
Rafa,
to agree.
you get Rafa Ortiz, and if you have any video footage of yourself running anything and you want Rafa to critique it, that's part of the Rafa presentation.
That could be funny.
That it's going to be hysterical.
It's gonna be hilarious.
Yeah. After Rafa, the other reason you should join is we're doing a whole diversity, equity, and inclusion series that's going to have amazing
Cool, lighting.
speakers. So you should just join.
There we go.
Trust us.
Huh.
Not to mention,
Maybe,
we come
yeah.
down and paddle in California sometimes.
Yeah, that's right. And then you can.
Yeah, I come up there. I did a big road trip after I got a boat. I was up doing 3 rivers and 3 states in like 5 days. I
Love
did the only thing I've run in Oregon so far is the Clackamas, the class 3, whatever it is.
Oh yeah, lots more to
It's
do up there.
closed.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I'll probably do I hope Natural Bridge next or River Bridge down on the North Fork Road.
I did that.
But
yeah.
I've got friends in Portland too, so that's nearby.
Yeah. Yeah, you should join us.
Yeah.
I should. Yeah, I mean, just like you said, those 2 speakers alone, that's worth it.
Yeah.
Rad people.
That
Doesn't
was
Rafa
our-
live up that way near White Salmon or something?
Yeah.
He's in charge.
That's what I thought. Yeah. So does my acquaintance. Barely know him. Rush Sturgis
Mm-hmm.
came from Otter Bar Lodge up here, which just shut down.
Yeah, that's some sad news right there.
Yeah.
I know, and I hope they do okay trying to get like all big single groups in there, because they're not trying to do like individual lodges, which kind of makes sense. That could be a mess, but
Right.
yeah. But I think they're doing pretty well financially anyhow, so I'm not worried.
Yeah. Well. All right. Well, thank you for joining.
Thanks. You guys have a good night.
All right.
All right.
Thank you, Sean.
Bye.
Night, night.
I think Teresa actually, given there's still some folks, we should just do our debrief maybe in a different.
I think so too.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm gonna hang up. Get ready.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
What, so, sorry, are we gonna log back in? Or call it for a later time?
Let's call it for a later time.
Okay,
Yeah.
yeah, I've got Rainey on text.
Okay.
Asking, I feel some obligation to give him a reply.
Yeah. Let him know that Teresa will sync up with the 2 of you.
Okay,
Yeah.
I
Okay.
will.
All right.
Okay.
Bye, Paul. Thank you.
thank you. Bye,
So
guys.
good. So
Thanks.
good.
Cheers.